Grief when they die is unreasonable, for death is the natural consequence of birth, and living beings come into and go from this world of their own accord. Our attachment to them is an unreliable emotion, contingent upon all sorts of other factors. It can vanish swiftly. We yearn for relationships and to meet with those who are dear to us, yet meeting is inevitably followed by parting. We should therefore willingly separate from all that we cling to at present, before such a separation is forced on us. Here the emphasis is placed on recognizing that people, things and situations are not static. Clinging to them and wishing them to remain unchanged is unrealistic and a cause of fear. Once we are able to acknowledge this, our attachment and thereby our fear will diminish, and we will be better prepared to face both life and death.
The second chapter explains that even though the body clearly gives rise to disturbing attitudes and suffering, it can be used constructively and must therefore be cared for in an appropriate and moderate way. While we do not actually think of the body itself as pleasurable, we feel that if only the circumstances were right, we would be able to experience physical well-being and pleasure. This is an illusion, since we mistake what is in itself suffering and a source of suffering for a source of pleasure. Different forms of pain and discomfort are abundant and arise without any effort on our part, whereas pleasure is rare and difficult to induce. Most of the pleasure we experience requires effort and is due to external factors. It is therefore like something foreign to the body. Pain and suffering, on the other hand, frequently arise without any external provocation, indicating the body's intrinsic disposition toward them. In this way, the coarsest and most easily recognizable form of suffering is identified. However, what we normally think of as pleasure is not as it appears, for when it is intensified, it turns into pain. Protracted discomfort does not follow the same pattern, its intensification gives rise to increasingly severe pain. When the body is in the process of disintegrating, is vulnerable, composed of conflicting elements, impossible to keep comfortable, and when every action requires effort, how can it be considered a source of pleasure? Do we ever experience pleasure intense enough to override pain? We mistake the alleviation of discomfort for pleasure, but the relief experienced simply disguises the beginning of a new form of discomfort. How can the mere alleviation of pain be considered real pleasure? Thus, what is conventionally regarded as pleasure is, in fact, the suffering of change, since it does not last.
The body, which is the basis for these experiences, is the result of past actions motivated by disturbing attitudes and is thus contaminated. Even when not overtly present, suffering may arise at any moment. This constant potential for suffering reveals that the body itself constitutes the pervasive suffering of conditioning. Without recognizing that the contaminated psychophysical aggregates themselves are the subtlest form of suffering, we cannot develop the genuine wish to free ourselves from the cycle of birth and death. Understanding the other two kinds of suffering leads toward an understanding of this. Desire for sensual pleasures is unlimited and inexhaustible. No matter what pleasures we enjoy or how long we indulge in them, our thirst will never be quenched. The only effect of sensuality is to increase craving. In demonstrating the undesirability of what we desire as well as the unwholesomeness of desirous states of mind, the third chapter focuses mainly on attachment to sexual pleasure and on the unclean nature of the body. In doing so, discussion centers on women's bodies and on men's desire for women. To understand the reasons for this, one must bear in mind that Aryadeva's text and the subsequent commentaries on it were addressed to what was probably an exclusively male audience, consisting almost entirely of monks trying to observe vows of celibacy. Since most human beings are not naturally celibate, one can assume that preoccupation with women's bodies and sexual desire was a pertinent issue for them. One must also recall the status of women throughout recorded history, both in Indian society and most other societies, as possessions first of their fathers and then of their husbands. This enforced passivity, which deprived them of any effective rights within or control of the society in which they lived, left them with very limited means of exercising influence, among which was their sexual desirability. The almost exclusive emphasis on the uncleanness of women's bodies is perhaps a reaction to this manipulative power, since the arguments concentrate primarily on establishing the undesirability of sexual contact with women rather than on the undesirability of a lustful state of mind.
Since learning to apply the appropriate antidotes to disturbing states of mind is a lengthy process, beginners are usually advised to deal with disturbing attitudes and emotions temporarily by putting distance between themselves and whatever stimulates these states. Although reviling women's bodies and behavior may act as an incentive to do this and may to some extent counteract lust, it could also have the unwanted effect of provoking antipathy to women. Since Aryadeva was a practitioner of the great vehicle and therefore motivated by love and compassion for all living beings, one can rest assured that this was certainly not his intention. However, one wonders why the uncleanness of the male body is not stressed to the same extent, since contemplation of the true nature of one's own body can also effectively counteract sexual desire. In any case, we must be wary of superimposing modern values and sensibilities on the text, but instead draw from it what is relevant and view it within a historical context. Aryadeva points out that none of the reasons we use to justify our desire, such as the other's attractive appearance, good qualities, or behavior, are valid reasons. Moreover, we often feel embarrassed when we recall how shamelessly we acted when we were younger. How can the obsessive state of mind associated with desire be called pleasurable? If desire itself were pleasurable, we wouldn't feel compelled to satisfy it. On the contrary, it is like an itchy rash. Scratching it brings temporary relief, but only aggravates it in the long run. Infatuation makes us act in ways we would normally find humiliating and causes unreasonable jealousy.
To counteract our misconceptions about the body, we must consider how it has come into being through unclean causes and produces unclean substances. Nothing can alter this unclean nature, no matter what artifice we employ. If it is possible to rid oneself of desire for others' bodies, how can we claim that the body really is clean? When we become aware of the defects of what is desired, desire for it ceases. The misconception of the self, the view of the transitory collection as real, I, and mine, is one of the fundamental disturbing attitudes. While the 10th chapter refutes various wrong views regarding the self, the main topic of the 4th chapter is pride and egoism, which are manifestations of the coarsest forms of this misconception. Since the effects of egoism and pride are most evident in the autocratic behavior of those who hold power, this chapter examines the conduct of kings to demonstrate that such feelings are unjustified and to show how they may be overcome.
A king has no reason to feel arrogant, since he is actually an employee of the people and holds his position by common consent. His apparent authority and control over the finances and activities of his country are an illusion, for he is invested with these powers by his subjects. It is totally unjustified for him to use the protection of his subjects as an excuse for irreligious actions. He may think that protecting them, their affairs and customs is a religious practice, but it is merely his duty and no more of a religious practice than any other form of work. Kings are in a perilous position, for they are easily tempted to abuse the power they wield. Manuals on statecraft are frequently misleading, and the advice they contain is not necessarily for the well-being of the people. Violence toward enemies and harsh punishment of lawbreakers is inadmissible behavior for a king. Such actions will bring him only infamy and suffering.
Neither a royal birth nor wealth and power are reasons for egoism and pride, since all of these are unreliable and essenceless. Arrogance regarding such things is quickly deflated when confronted with the greater wealth, social standing and authority of others. Understanding the actual nature of the contaminated psychophysical aggregates and how these four kinds of misconceptions regarding them create suffering makes us wish to free ourselves from cyclic existence. When we then consider the situation of others, which essentially is like our own, we will feel compassion, if a sense of closeness with them has been established. Development of this compassion gives rise to the aspiration to attain enlightenment for the sake of others. A profound personal recognition of the unsatisfactoriness of cyclic existence forms the basis for this, otherwise we will not empathize with them nor wish to help them.